Okay, I think we're live. So welcome everybody. It's Ryan here from No Meat May, and very excited to be here again today with the brilliant Emma Strutt from the Lentil Intervention, who's going to talk us through plant-based nutrition 101. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the land that I'm on today and the traditional owners of the land, which are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And as I say, we're really excited to be here again with Emma. One of the, I guess, key things when you're switching to a plant-based diet or introducing plant-based diet is making sure you do it right. And as we say, we kind of steal the words from the great George Michael: if you're going to do it right. And there's no one better that we've found than Emma Strutt to talk to nutrition. So Emma, I'll just introduce you there. How are you going, Emma?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks again for your time. Your session last year was really well received, and again, doing this early in the month of May, so the third day is brilliant, because make sure people get off on the right foot. I think too, one of the biggest myths that we're trying to sort of tackle as part of No Meat May is this belief that people have that meat is essential to your diet. And I think in our last survey, it was around 61% of people who responded believe or still believe that meat is essential to a human diet. And we're here to unpack that. It's absolutely not. You can have a small amount of meat and be really healthy, but it's not essential. It's really very much a choice. And I think when we're facing climate change and the immense cruelty of factory farming, it's a choice that we need to question more and more. And we also have a session with Emma in a couple of weeks' time, which focuses on other myths around plant-based eating, which we'll touch on a little bit today. But I'm going to stop talking now and throw to Emma, who's going to talk us through the essentials of plant-based nutrition.
All right, so I'm just going to set up and share my screen here. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Okay, so big hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in today, and can I just say big thanks and also congratulations for taking part in No Meat May this year, not only for your health but also for animals and the health of the planet. Before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of the land I'm currently on, and I'm speaking to you from Gungaloo country in Queensland. Now, I'm sure some of you tuning in today will already be total pros at living a plant-based lifestyle, but for others, this might actually be a pretty big deal in your first ever foray into the world of plant-based eating. And if that's you, I'm sure you've got lots of questions. So today I'm here to show you that this way of eating can be healthy, it can be easy, it can be really tasty, as you'll soon find out once you take a look through all that No Meat May resources. But as with any way of eating, whether it's plant-based or not, a little bit of nutrition knowledge can really go a long way. And we want you feeling absolutely fantastic this month and hopefully into the future as you're eating plant-based. So I'm just here to give you a little bit of an overview of some plant-based nutrition basics. And as Ryan said, I'll be joining you again later in the month to dispel some of those big myths and misconceptions that just refuse to go away. Okay. So firstly, very quick intro to me. For those of you who haven't seen me around the traps before, my name's Emma. I'm an accredited practicing dietitian and fellow of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. I'm co-founder of the charity organisation, the Lentil Intervention, but probably the most important and relevant dot point there out of all of these for today at least is the fact that I've been meat-free for roughly half my life now, completely plant-based for 13 years, and I'm still waiting for that protein deficiency to kick in. So firstly, to put everyone's minds at ease, oftentimes the very first question I'll get about a plant-based diet is, but is it safe? So long story short, yes, very much so, with just a little bit of planning. So here you'll see an excerpt from the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They're the largest dietetics organization in the world. And this text is taken from their most recent position statement on vegetarian and vegan diets. And it highlights that this way of eating is indeed healthful, nutritionally adequate and appropriate for all life stages. They also go on to state that plant-based diets are more environmentally sustainable and highlight that vegans and vegetarians are at reduced risk of certain health conditions. And the health benefits associated with plant-based eating are pretty significant. So taking a look at some of these numbers, you'll see that plant-based eaters have reduced risk of heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. They have lower rates of cancer, lower incidence of diverticular disease and kidney disease. The list goes on. And I just want to point out that these stats are actually taken from very large population-based studies with thousands of participants. So not some small obscure trial with only a handful of people taking part. So the results here have a bit of weight to them. And in 2019, the Eat Lancet report even went as far as to estimate that 11 million premature adult deaths could be prevented each year if we made the switch to eating more plant-based. So how can a plant-based diet be so beneficial when it comes to health? I won't bore you with all the technical terms on the slide there, but long story short, by eating this way, you increase your intake of beneficial antioxidants and phytochemicals, of key vitamins and minerals, and of fiber, which are all really important aspects for good health. And you'll also very likely be reducing your caloric density of foods, which is great for long-term weight management. And then on the flip side, you'll be reducing or eliminating compounds in foods that are detrimental to your health, including some that are known carcinogens. So something that's really important to remember is that we eat food, not individual nutrients. So food is always going to be a package deal. So yes, there is no denying that meat might come packaged up with things like protein and iron and zinc, but it'll also come with compounds that can be detrimental to your health too. So things like saturated fat and trans fats, which have been linked with heart disease. Chemical contaminants are also another consideration we have to account for these days. So things like heavy metals and PCBs. And then there's the nitrosamines in certain meat products that have been linked to bowel cancer. So seeing as you can still get your protein and your zinc and your iron from plants, but now they'll come hand in hand with beneficial compounds that promote health, it's really important to ask yourself, do the benefits outweigh the risks? And as it's No Meat May, we should really take a specific look at meat. A few years ago, the International Agency for Research on Cancer completed a thorough review of the literature on meat and processed meats and cancer risk. It's a really big undertaking. The working group evaluated over 800 studies. And after reviewing the literature, they decided to classify red meat as a group 2A carcinogen, meaning it probably causes cancer. But they went one step further with processed meats and they classified it as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning we know that this is carcinogenic to humans with regular exposure. So processed meats include the obvious things like salami, bacon, pastrami, but it also includes things like ham, corned beef, sausages, anything that's been salted, fermented, smoked or processed to enhance flavour or the shelf life of a product. So types of meats consumed by some Westerners every single day. And they concluded that for every 50-gram portion of processed meat daily, there was an increased risk of colorectal cancer by about 18%. And to put that into perspective, that's less than 1 sausage, so not a lot. Processed meats actually fall into the same cancer category as asbestos, gamma radiation, and smoking. Now, just to be clear, I'm not insinuating that the risk is the same. This rating system didn't assess level of risk, but they look at strength of evidence, and these products ended up in the same category. So something to think about, and it just reiterates that plant-based options are a pretty good way to go. There's a slight caveat though. So over the last few years, plant-based products have really taken off, which is fantastic from an ethical and environmental perspective. We now have so much choice. It's honestly never been easier to transition to a plant-based or meat-free diet. And I always feel like a bit of a meanie saying this next bit, but with my dietitian hat on, I do need to say, as far as health outcomes go, many of these foods are just as bad as the animal-based products or close to. I'm not trying to be the food police here. I'm not saying you can never eat these things. No, of course not. And some of these foods you probably really enjoy playing around with this month, and that's fine. But we just do need to be a little bit realistic about food. Just because a food is labelled as vegan or plant-based or meat-free doesn't automatically mean that it's health promoting. So just take a sensible approach. And if you're unsure about something, check the label and have a look at the nutrition panel. And it's important we do so because in Australia, and it's a similar situation in other Western countries, our diets aren't particularly that great to start with. So the vast majority of us don't eat enough veggies, and that includes a lot of plant-based dieters as well, unfortunately. Nearly 4 in 5 adults don't eat enough fruit, and about 1/3 up to 41% of calories are coming from discretionary foods, and that's a pretty big percentage. So those foods on the previous slide, you know, as I said, if you're completely new to this way of eating or you want to feature them occasionally, sure, have some fun and experiment. But let's just acknowledge that they're not nutritionally equal or as health promoting as your beans and your fruits and your veggies. So don't forget to eat those as well.
I'm going to cut in there, Emma, just an interesting way I sort of look at it with particularly looking at Australian data. I think the average Australian eats around 100 kilograms of meat per person per year. You know, half of that's white meat, half of that's red and processed meat. And, you know, when I think when you look at that and you break it down per day, it's, to me, not surprising that you're not eating enough fruit, or we're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, because your plate is crowded out, if you like. So that's where something like no meat May is great, because you basically eliminate all that meat, learn to fill it up with plants and plant proteins, high fiber foods, and learn to get all your nutrition from that. And then you know, maybe you don't need to bring meat back, I guess. But it is interesting that you can't get the amount of fruit and veg you need when you eat that much meat.
That's it. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So we definitely need to prioritize them more on our plate. So I mean, when it comes to food, both the plant-based eaters and the omnivores should get into the habit of asking really 2 simple questions. So number 1, is it from a plant? And for this month, I'm hoping that's going to be a big yes for most of you. But number 2 is, how processed is it? And now, I'm not saying all processing is bad. There are some exceptionally healthy processed foods out there, but the majority of the time, these 2 simple questions are going to be a nice way of steering you in the right direction. So just keep that in the back of your head. All right, so to simplify your needs as much as possible, I'm going to run you through what I've called my little plant-based high five. Just a bit of a disclaimer, of course, this is generalized advice. So if you have a specific health concern, or, you know, you need some individual advice, see a health provider. But generally speaking, eating this way is going to set most of you up to ensure that you're covering your nutritional needs. So what it includes is 1 serve of flax, chia or hemp seeds, 2 or more serves of legumes or a soy product, 3 serves of fruit, and bonus points here if you include some berries, 4 or more serves of whole grains or whole grain products, and at least 5 serves of veggies, making sure that you're including some leafy greens and some orange veg there. And very importantly, if you do intend on sticking to this meat-free dietary change long term, and you want to ditch most or all of your animal products, you need to make sure that you've got a source of B12, ideally a supplement. That's a non-negotiable for strict plant-based eaters, because deficiency can be a bit problematic if you let it go too long. So just make sure that you're over that and taking your supplement.
And then on that one, a question that came up last year, and I'm sure it comes up again this year, is around things like nutritional yeast and I guess plant-based products that do have B12 in them. Yep. You'd still recommend supplementing regardless, even though you can get it.
It's a safer way to get it. If you're relying on fortified foods, I'd probably want you to include at least 3 different types of fortified foods, because B12 can be degraded a little bit if it's exposed to heat, or if it's exposed to UV light, for example. Yep. So the safest way is to go for the supplement. I know.
And maybe reframing that slightly different way. If you were to supplement every day, and then you're also eating food with B12, such as nutritional yeast and fortified plant-based products, etc., is there such a thing as too much B12?
Not really, because it's a water-soluble vitamin, so you usually just, you know, pee the excess out. Yeah. I wouldn't be taking massive doses of a supplement daily, because there has been a little bit of research to just suggest that might be a bit of a concern, but at the doses that are usually recommended, perfectly safe. Just Yep. Don't mega dose on them. I know some people, not naming any names, that have eaten like a whole bottle over the course of a few days because they like the taste of it. Don't do that, please. They're not lollies. But yeah, no, if you want to include fortified foods, just make sure that you're including a few there. All right, so first up, why flax, chia or hemp? Okay, so it's because these 3 little seeds are really excellent sources of omega-3 fats. There are a few different types of fatty acids, 2 of which are considered essential, those being alpha-linolenic acid and linoleic acid. And they're certain types of omega-3s and omega-6s. And what it means by essential is that we have to eat them in our diets because they can't be synthesized by the body. So both are important to consume, but omega-6 tends to be far more common in our diets than omega-3 do. In fact, the intake of omega-6 rich plant oils in the last few decades has almost tripled the amount of omega-6 in our diet. So it's going to be extremely rare that someone would have to worry about an omega-6 deficiency, but omega-3 takes a little bit more planning. So omega-3 fats are found in high concentration in the brain and your retina. They also have a role in cell membrane function, so they're considered pretty important for long-term health. And I apologize, I need to get just a little bit technical here, but it's also important to note that these omega fats come in different forms. So shorter chain fatty acids and longer chain fatty acids. And for the omega-3s, there's ALA, EPA, and DHA. So ALA is the shorter chain fatty acid, and this is the type that we consume in plant foods. So your flax, your chia, your hemp, your walnuts, and this is the one that's considered essential. EPA and DHA are largely derived either from your fatty fish, but they're also found in algae, so you can get them in plant-based supplements. But our bodies can actually convert ALA into EPA and then into DHA. So EPA and DHA aren't considered essential, but the conversion rates can vary a lot depending on things like our age, our sex, and also other dietary factors like intake of saturated fats, trans fats, and omega-6 fats. And because omega-3 and omega-6 conversion pathways are so similar, as you can see here, it's thought that if we're eating way too many omega-6, it can actually make it harder for omega-3 conversion. So this all sounds really technical and difficult, but it basically boils down to avoiding trans and saturated fats where you can. So in the plant-based world, that's your ultra-processed type foods and also coconut products. Make sure that you're getting a good source of omega-3 to ensure that you're not getting way too much omega-6 and then next to no omega-3. So ideally, you want to include about 1 or 2 tablespoons of flax, chia, hemp seeds each day. And if you're ticking the boxes there, you're going to be doing pretty well. And for this month, that's all you need to worry about. But I will just point out there is a lot of nuance around this topic. So for some stages of life, for certain health conditions, a supplement may be warranted, but I definitely recommend talking to a healthcare provider for more individualized advice on that one.
So if you basically go to the shops now and grab some chia seeds, some hemp seeds, and some flax seeds, ground flax seeds. And I've heard too, keeping them in the fridge. I don't know if this is true, but keeping in the fridge, they keep better or they keep more of the nutritional value than having them on the shelf. So
yeah, so there's been some more recent research suggesting that they might not be as kind of volatile as we once thought, but in Australia, because it's generally so hot, it's a good thing to do, just to prevent it from going rancid. But if you're, grinding it up and you're using it within the space of a couple of weeks, I wouldn't stress too much. But yeah, summertime, I'd probably err on the side of caution there and keep it in the fridge.
Yep.
Okay, so next up, we've got 2 or more serves of legumes or a soy product like tofu. And just to note the serve sizes here, so these recommendations are taken from the dietary guidelines, but some people might not actually want to have that much in a meal. So you might want to aim for 3 or 4 smaller serves across the day if this is you. Okay, so if you've ever heard the name Gundry, or if you've heard the term plant paradox, you'll probably be well aware that legumes have had a bad rap in certain corners of the internet over the last few years. I'm wanting to shut that down right now and put your minds at ease. Legumes are extremely healthy and they're a valuable part of a plant-based diet. They're an environmentally sustainable protein source. They're much less resource intensive than meat. They're also low in calories. They're really high in fiber, and they include those wonderful prebiotic fibers too. So they're fantastic for gut health, and they're a great source of iron and zinc and a number of other micronutrients.
And on that one, sorry, I keep cutting in, but there's some of the questions we get asked in the group as well. But if you're type 2 or type 1 diabetic and you have to monitor your carbs, am I right? Legumes and pulses, whilst they have carbs in them, they're also full of fiber and other good things. So they're a better. Is there a problem, or what would you advise?
No. So I would actually say they're one of the most important foods to be including if you do have diabetes, because as you outlined, they're very high in fiber. They've also got a bit of protein in them as well, but that fiber makes it a slowly digested kind of carbohydrate. So they're low glycemic index. So you should have a more kind of sustained effect on your blood sugars than sitting down to a bowl of white rice or white bread, for example. And because they're so low in fat, you'll also be addressing that insulin resistance problem. I'm probably getting a bit too technical here, but it's a really good idea to include them, long story short, if you are diabetic.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool.
Okay, and another good thing about legumes is they're actually linked with longevity. So this study on the slide here, it found that legumes were the most important dietary predictor of a long life. And of course, I can't talk about longevity without briefly mentioning the blue zones. If you haven't heard of the blue zones before, this term refers to the 5 regions of the world where there are whole communities that are most likely to become centenarians and be really healthy into their old age. And as you can see, there's 5 very different communities from various areas across the globe, but they do share some similarities. So all of them consume predominantly plant-based diets, and all of them also consume legumes as their main protein source. So legumes are seen as the cornerstone of every blue zone diet. So I beg you, please don't be scared off by the lectins unless you're intending to eat, uncooked beans. And I don't know anyone who would be wanting to do that. So the proof really is in the plants here. These foods are incredibly healthy, so include 2 or more serves a day if you can. Okay.
Just a question, sorry, I've got a question with the group talking about soybeans. Someone's mentioned that they've been told that all soybeans are genetically modified.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Is it a problem? What's your view?
All right, so I'm actually going to cover soy in a minute, but I'll address the GM now because I don't have that in my slides. So genetic modification of soybeans in Australia, at least, that's a non-issue because they're not cleared for human consumption. So if you're buying Australian grown soybeans, it's not going to be genetically modified. If you're getting products that are imported from America that contain soy, you might need to be a little bit more careful there. So if genetic modification is something that you're trying to avoid, you'd want to go for organic products if you're looking for things that have been made overseas and shipped in. But in Australia, it's not cleared for human consumption yet, so you don't even have to worry about that.
Yeah. And is it actually a problem, GM? Like, is it?
Oh, that's depends who you talk to. Do a whole lecture on that.
Okay.
Long story short, health-wise, it doesn't seem to be, but environmentally, because of the pesticides and whatnot used in conventional farming techniques, that could be a bit of a problem. And there's a whole bunch of ethics that are, another webinar. Long story short, it's a very messy topic, but if you are wanting to avoid it, just choose organic and it won't be GM. Okay, sorry, that was a rambly answer. Next up, we're going to talk about fruit, and you want to try and get 3 serves in a day if you can. Fruit's delicious, it's sweet, it's juicy, it's nature's ultimate fast food. It comes with its own wrapping, so environmentally friendly in that way. There's 2 things I want to address here though, because more and more people are starting to turn away from fruit for unjustified reasons. So number 1, fruit will not make you fat. Studies consistently link fruit consumption with lower body weight, including this huge 24-year follow-up that followed over 133,000 people. The results associated an average weight loss of just over ½ a pound for each daily serve of fruit, more if those fruit choices were berries, apples, or pears. Why is that? Because fruit is a high water content option. It's also got fiber, it's got antioxidants, and that makes fruit low in calorie density. So it's completely different to sitting down to, say, a bowl of Fruit Loops or a handful of lollies. And number 2, you do not have to avoid fruit if you're a diabetic. So this is a 2017 study, so a little dated now, but it's still an important mention because it tracked over 500,000 people for 7 years, so a really huge study. And it found that higher fresh fruit consumption was actually associated with lower risks of developing diabetes in the first place. But for those that already had it, lower risk of death and development of major complications. So the take-home message is you do not have to avoid fruit. It's really, really good for you, and I recommend you include some every day. Okay, so next up is 4 or more serves of whole grains. So the main message here is just to pick your carbs with care. So everything from jelly beans to kidney beans are considered carbohydrates. And while it's true that refined carbs aren't all that great in terms of health outcomes, the exact opposite is true for whole grains. So when you refine a grain, you remove most of the fiber and the beneficial nutrients, and all you're typically left with is a quick digesting starch and a bit of protein. But your whole grains are a completely different story. They provide you with B vitamins, vitamin E, different minerals and phytonutrients, as well as a good amount of fiber to slow that digestion process down. This was a really big meta-analysis, and it examined whole grain consumption and various health outcomes. And it found that whole grain consumption was actually associated with reduced risk of death, reduced cardiovascular disease, diabetes, total cancers, as well as respiratory issues. So whole grains get a really big tick in terms of health benefits and are a great inclusion in the diet. So be sure to include some intact whole grains. So that's things like brown rice and barley, quinoa. But when you're opting for something slightly more processed, like bread, for example, try to keep that carb to fiber ratio 5:1 or less. So that means for every 5 grams of carbohydrates, there should be at least 1 gram of fiber. And also just on bread, don't be fooled by the color. Just because it doesn't look white doesn't necessarily mean it's not based on white flour. So take a look at the ingredients list. If the flour is wholemeal flour, excellent, you're onto a winner. But if it just says wheat flour, that's white flour. So that's more a refined product. So just check the labels.
And then just a quick one on grains too, because there are some diets out there that people avoid grains altogether, and what the science just doesn't back that up. It's is that fair to say it's just a marketing thing? Or
yeah, definitely. I mean, take home message is grains are really, really healthy for you. They're fantastic for your microbiome. The more we're learning about gut health being associated with other health outcomes, the more important grains become, basically. So they're really important inclusion, especially for people plant-based, because you'll need certain amino acids and certain vitamins and minerals that are in the grains that might not necessarily be as high in other foods. So it's really important to try and include all food groups if you can. Yeah,
gotcha. You know, I think the bread, the bread we go for is a wholemeal whole grain, which is kind of
perfect.
Ticks those boxes, but it kind of surprises me that there's not more of it there, because, you know, something like a tiny little section that actually does qualify as being, you know, ticking all the boxes. But
yes, it's quite surprising actually, and it's a bit disappointing that the options are so limited if you are wanting to tick all of those boxes, but they are there, so you just need to search them out.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so lastly here we've got veggies. So veggies basically give you your best nutritional bang for your buck. All are fantastic, but leafy greens and cruciferous veggies, so they're veggies from your cabbage family, they're going to be especially great sources of iron, calcium and antioxidants. And then of course your orange and red coloured veg are great for beta carotene. So we want to include all of these. So diversity is key, basically. You really want to think colour and variety to maximise your nutrition intake. And I know it's always a bit cliche, but you really do want to eat that rainbow, because the pigments that give food their lovely colours also provide us with beneficial compounds as well. And the benefits are all slightly different depending on what colour it is. So eat at least 5 serves of veggies per day, go for a good mix. But as I said, leafy greens, orange veg and your cruciferous veg, they want to be on the plate a fair bit at the time. Okay, so putting this into practice, a typical day would look something like this. So brekkie, you can have a nice big bowl of oats with a seed like, you know, flax meal or chia seeds, some berries and a calcium fortified plant milk. Morning tea, you could have a piece of fruit and a handful of nuts. For lunch, you could have, you know, a tofu and veggie stir fry with some brown rice or some quinoa or some soba noodles. Afternoon tea, some veggie sticks and hummus. And then for dinner, you could have a nice big roast potato with some lentil bolognese and some salad on the side. And then if you're feeling like something sweet for dessert, you could actually try and make yourself a banana or mango nice cream, which is just where you get frozen fruit and blend it up. It's really delicious. But as you can see there, like the plant-based diets don't necessarily have to mean hard or super time consuming. It's all really easy stuff. And it's actually really cheap if you're avoiding the more like treat type foods. And eating this way is going to allow you to hit all of your recommended nutrient requirements. It's really not that difficult. All right, so that was my little plant-based high five. Now I'm just going to quickly cover some of the more common questions I tend to get. And the most common question is, of course, always something to do with protein. Firstly, every single plant food you eat will have some protein in it. Even the lettuce leaves in your salad will have some. Protein is actually an umbrella term for 20 common amino acids. Over half of these amino acids are considered non-essential, meaning the body can actually make them, but 9 are considered essential, meaning we do have to eat them. I think only 2 are worth a very brief mention for plant-based eaters, and that's lysine and methionine. So lysine is high in legumes, but not so high in grains, whereas methionine is actually the other way around. And this goes back to your point before, Ryan, like it's important to include all of those food groups, including your grains. But this means that those limiting amino acids become a bit of a non-issue as long as the person is consuming adequate calories from a good variety of food. How much protein we need is going to vary depending on age, sex, health status, activity level, but it's honestly not as much as everyone tends to think. So the average female needs about 46 grams a day, whereas the average male will need a bit more at about 64 grams. Some people will argue that plant-based diets with their proteins, they're not as well digested, so we need a little bit more. I've got plenty to say about that argument, but that's probably for another time because it gets a bit technical. But even if we were to err on the side of caution and go above those recommendations, the good news is most of us are getting more than this anyway. So this study looked at the data from the Adventist Health Research, and it found that the median intake of protein on a vegan diet was 71 grams. So you're hitting the mark. I don't want to downplay the importance of protein. I think it's actually pays for vegans and vegetarians to just be a little bit mindful of prioritizing those more protein-rich foods like your legumes and your soy products in the meals. And it's especially important as we age. So if you're an older gent, for example, I'd want to see you getting more than that 71 grams. But on the whole, if you're getting adequate calories and you're eating your grains and your legumes and your fruits, your veggies, your nuts and your seeds in good variety, you're going to be absolutely fine. What about athletes though? So I'll be covering this in a bit more detail in my next talk, but just a very quick overview. Firstly, I'm not trying to sound mean, but if you just go to the gym a couple times a week, or if you play footy on the weekend, you might like to consider yourself an athlete, and you definitely are, but you don't actually need to change that much nutritionally. But for the serious athlete though, we'll just touch on a few things. Obviously, it's going to depend on your sport and the frequency of training. So your protein needs might be anywhere from 0.8 grams per kilogram right up to about 2 grams per kilogram for some people. Most won't need that higher end low. But it's also important to highlight that if you're exercising more, you're usually going to be hungrier. So you're going to be eating more food. So you may well be covering most of these additional needs by default, depending on your food choices. That's number one. Ideal timing of protein is still argued about back and forth in the literature. So what's probably the most important thing to focus on is consuming protein evenly across the day. So don't fall into the trap of having a low protein breakfast and lunch and then dumping all of your protein into the dinner meal, because that's not the most efficient way of doing it. But even as an athlete, you can definitely achieve adequate protein on a plant-based diet. And before I do move on from the protein issues, I will just address a couple of issues about soy foods now, because as you said, Ryan, like more and more people are fearing soy products and staying away from them. So let's just unpack this.
It's a big one coming up now in the comments. So thank you for everyone patiently waiting for this slide. But I know everyone has, as Emma mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation around soy and a lot of fear and unwarranted. But anyway, throw to Emma. Yeah.
Okay. So first one is you've probably heard that soy increases your risk of breast cancer. This is just not true. This is not what the science indicates. So higher soy consumption has actually been associated with a 30% reduced risk of developing breast cancer in the first place. But then even for those that have already had breast cancer, soy intake has been associated with reduced recurrence and improved survival. It's thought to be especially helpful in younger years as breast tissue is actually developing. So it's a really great food to include for children and teens. And soy has also been linked to reduced prostate cancer risk as well. Another misconception is that soy has feminizing effects on men. So where does this stem from? So it is true that soys do contain phytoestrogens, which are plant estrogens, but they've been really well studied. And these isoflavones, or those plant estrogens, have no impact on circulating estrogen levels, sperm or semen parameters in males. So full disclosure, there have been 2 case studies reported in the literature amongst thousands of studies on soy, so 2 individuals where there have been negative effects, but these 2 men were consuming huge amounts of soy products. So one man who developed gynecomastia, he was actually drinking almost 3 litres of soy milk per day, which is far more than anyone would actually recommend. Dairy and meat products, however, they actually contain real estrogens. So this is something I'd be a bit more concerned about if you're an individual with a predisposition for developing gynecomastia. 2 of the 5 blue zones consume between 1 to 3 serves of soy per day. And as we've just learned, these are the longest lived people in the world. So if consumed in logical amounts, this is a health promoting food. If you do want to find out more about soy though, because there is a lot to unpack, scan that little QR code that's at the top of the slide there. That's going to take you to a podcast interview that we did at the Lentil Intervention with Dr. Mark Mazzina. He's a world leader in soy research, so well worth a listen. Okay, so moving on.
Sorry, Emma, on the 17th, when we look at some of the myths around, are you going to unpack that one a little bit more? Or
yes. Yep.
Yeah. So if that is a real concern to you and you want more information, come back on the 17th or look on our Facebook page and go into more depth on that one.
Definitely. But do drop your questions in the chat anyway, because I'll try and weave them into the next lecture then if there's a common kind of question being asked there.
Brilliant.
All right, so moving on, the next few questions I commonly get asked around micronutrients. For the sake of time, I'm just going to cover 3 that I think are probably most important to be aware of. We've already covered B12, so hopefully you'll be supplementing there. So firstly, let's take a look at iron. The types of iron in plant foods is called non-heme iron, and it's not as readily absorbed in the body as the iron found in animal products, which is called heme iron. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the iron in animal products have been linked to a number of poorer health outcomes. And if low iron is a concern to you, there are things that we can do to boost our absorption of plant iron. So there's a few things to consider when it comes to plant-based iron. Depending on age and sex, the recommendations in Australia for adults is between 8 to 18 milligrams per day, higher in pregnancy. And it has been suggested that a little more is required with plant-based eaters because of those absorption issues. But I do think it's just important to mention that those who consume well-planned plant-based diets are at no greater risk of iron deficiency anemia than omnivores are. So when you're thinking iron, I want you to think beans, greens, whole grains, nuts and seeds, so generally the more protein-rich foods, but also be mindful that there are foods that can enhance absorption as well as inhibit them. So absorption enhancers include vitamin C rich foods, things like strawberries, citrus fruit, kiwi fruit, red capsicum and broccoli. Vitamin C can actually increase absorption so much that it almost removes that difference between the heme and the non-heme iron absorption rate. So it's pretty powerful. Other enhancers can include beta-carotene rich foods like carrot, sweet potato, and also foods from your allium family like your garlic and onion. Factors that inhibit absorption include phytates. So phytic acid or phytates is found in a lot of plant foods, particularly your grains and your legumes. But the good thing is that they reduce when you soak or cook things. And I don't know anyone that's walking around eating raw rice or lentils, so it becomes pretty well a non-issue on a well-planned diet. But if you are really trying to boost your levels, you could look at sprouting or fermenting, because that's going to decrease the phytates even more. The tannins and polyphenols in tea and coffee can also greatly reduce iron absorption. So tea is a really big one here. It can reduce absorption by about 70%. So move your tea and coffee away from your meals, about an hour either side. And calcium can reduce absorption a little bit too. So your levels are already, if your levels are already marginal, I wouldn't be chugging back on the calcium fortified plant milks or taking a calcium supplement at the same time as your meal. And I've just got one extra little bit to cover, Ryan, and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of that information sounds a bit technical, but the most helpful thing to get into the habit of doing is pairing your iron-rich foods with your vitamin C-rich foods. You'll notice that a lot of traditional recipes from various cultures already do this. So, put some tomato in your dal, put some capsicum in your tofu curry, fruit on your breakfast. Try and establish these habits now, and it's going to set you up really nicely long term. But if your levels are deficient, the quickest way is to boost them up again with a supplement. And then once you're there, pay attention to your diet.
Now we're just going to cut to our first ad break. I think we've done here at No Meat Made, but just to sort of highlight that, as Emma says, we encourage all of our participants doing No Meat May really to focus on those iron-rich foods, such as the dark leafy greens and dried fruits, and follow Emma's great tips for maximising absorption. But there are a significant number of women who do struggle with iron deficiency, as many as 2 in 5. So we say it's always best to monitor your iron levels in consultation with your GP. And that's irrespective of what diet you're on. It is something to keep an eye on, but especially when you are transitioning to more plant-based eating. And if required, and you do need to opt for an iron supplement, we have partnered with Ferrigen, and we absolutely endorse their products. We've got here, these are available in Australia only, I should qualify, but we have Ferrigen product, which is with iron, so with vitamin C, it's a folic acid one as well, which helps absorption. So we've got these 3 products. But to learn more, we'd say to go to the Ferrigen website, which is ferrigen.com.au, to get more information if you're in Australia. Thanks, Emma.
Okay. All right. So next up is calcium. So I'll just get this slide up. The Australian recommendations for adults are between 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams a day, depending on sex and age. Whether we actually need this much, though, is a little bit debatable. So in the UK, for example, the recommendations there are 700 milligrams. But regardless of what level we're aiming for, we can achieve these numbers pretty easily. It will just take a little bit of planning. So most people who worry about calcium do so because of bone health. But just as an aside here, calcium is only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to bone health. Vitamin D, vitamin K, a lot of your other micronutrients, physical activity, and adequate plant-based proteins can all help maintain healthy bones, whereas too much caffeine, alcohol, salt is thought to be detrimental. So when it comes to bone health, it's not just all about calcium. Nevertheless, we definitely do need it. So good sources of calcium include your low oxalate leafy greens, legumes, calcium set tofu, your fortified plant milks, certain nuts and seeds as well. So chia seeds, almond, sesame seeds, they're all great, but absorption really does matter too. So for example, your spinach is actually loaded with calcium, but because of their high oxalate content, we only absorb about 5% of it. Whereas your low oxalate leafy greens, like your Asian greens and your broccoli and your kale, they have calcium that's actually more absorbable than that from dairy milk. So I don't want people to get too caught up in this and obsess over calcium absorption or avoiding oxalates. But again, this should just highlight that having a really good variety of food in your diet is important. So don't just, have one type of leafy green or one legume or one whole grain. You want to mix it up as much as you can. And lastly, iodine. So this is one micronutrient that's often overlooked, and it really shouldn't be, because mild deficiency in Australia and elsewhere in the world has actually started re-emerging in both omnivores and plant-based eaters, I should point out. So iodine is really important for proper thyroid function, so necessary for normal growth and metabolism. It's also extremely important to be aware of if you're a woman of reproductive age. So in Australia, the levels of iodine in the soil aren't all that fantastic. So generally speaking, the levels in our fresh produce aren't great either. We do have mandatory fortification of commercial non-organic breads. You can also get iodized salts, and seaweeds will also contain iodine. Just be a little bit careful with seaweeds though, because some types will have way too much, which can be just as detrimental to your health as not having enough. And then there are some seaweeds that are also commonly contaminated with heavy metals. So for example, I would never recommend that you have Haziki, because that's quite commonly contaminated with large amounts of arsenic. And kelp, that's a pretty common seaweed, but that's usually has way too much iodine. So safer ones would be, your nori sheets that you make sushi out of, or Dulse flakes. They're more appropriate options. But the amount still will vary, so don't just rely on seaweed as your sole source, basically. So if you're consuming bread, or you use iodized salt pretty regularly, or if you're consuming the occasional seaweed, you could be fine. But I'm not against using supplements if necessary, especially in women who are trying to conceive.
Salt's an interesting one, because salt's something that I think often you want to avoid from a health perspective, but the iodized salt obviously has good qualities in it. So like if you buy salt at all, buy iodized, at all time, and then what, just a pinch of salt every day on something will give you the iodine you need, or
yeah, so if you're just using it, like, don't drown your meals in salt. We definitely don't want you doing that. But if you use it normally as you would in cooking, just make sure that you're using an iodized one, and that will give you a fair bit. But to be honest, the main source for plant-based eaters in Australia is probably the bread, because it's fortified.
Yeah.
So just on the salt though, like a lot of people spend extra money on those fancy pink salts. They contain next to no iodine, so you may as well save your money there and just make sure that you're getting an iodized salt if you are going to use salt in your cooking.
Yep, cool.
All right, so I do hope that this presentation has made pretty clear that you can have fantastic health outcomes while you're eating plant-based. There's just those few little nutrition points to be aware of. But just very quickly, something I'm very, very passionate about is the sustainability of our food choices. And when it comes to food, plain and simple, animal-based products are more resource intensive than plant-based foods, as that purple line there makes abundantly clear. So climate change is the most important issue we face as a society. It's going to impact every single one of us. So the climate emergency is a public health issue. And because, you know, we're at the pointy end now, the IPCC reports have made that abundantly clear. What we do in the next 8 years could impact the planet for the next few thousand years. And what we eat matters a lot. So our food systems have caused 70% of biodiversity loss on land, 80% of global deforestation, and it contributes about a third of our greenhouse gas emissions. So shifting towards a plant-based eating pattern is one of the biggest individual contributions that we can make to reduce our impact on the planet. Okay, so to start wrapping things up, a few quick considerations moving forward. Number one, be curious and don't stop learning. So take a look through all of the No Meat May resources, or jump on the Lentil Intervention website and have a look there, learn some nutrition fundamentals, learn more about diet and climate, because that's incredibly important. But getting to know the basics is going to be incredibly helpful. And we're really lucky to be in a time where there's a wealth of free information available to you. Learn to read labels. This is important not only for avoiding animal products if you're wanting to go completely plant-based this month, but also knowing what we're putting into our bodies, what we're fueling ourselves with. It's important to understand what we're actually eating. Find your community. So this way of eating is a lot more common these days, but it's not quite the norm just yet. So finding like-minded people who are going to lift you up. This is why No Meat May community is so beneficial, because it's going to help you stick with your new habits as well. And you'll get that joy from interacting with new people, like-minded people.
I'm just going to do another little plug there, because if you're not a member of the No Meat May Facebook community, I think it is the best thing on Facebook. It is exactly what Emma said. It's full of the best food shares, cheerleaders. It's an incredible brains trust. There's so much knowledge, and the people in there are super generous. So if you're new to this and you're not in that group, get in that group now and engage and ask questions, because it's super supportive. And a lot of people that do this challenge end up doing it alone because their partner or kids aren't interested, and it can be quite isolating. So I think, yeah, jumping in that community, you'll realize you're part of a bigger movement.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, actually, if you're trying to make habits stick, is having like-minded people around you. So yeah, definitely. When you're eating out, don't be scared to inquire. So the best tip here is to look at the menu ahead of time. But if you haven't had a chance to, and you find that there's not anything on the menu that you think is going to be suitable, ask your waiter or ask the chef. You'd be surprised what dishes they can actually create for you. And I mean, be polite about it, but the more that people start asking for that plant-based option, the more that owners are actually going to take note that this is something that people want, and it's going to be beneficial for them to add something to the menu. So don't be scared to speak up. You don't have to just rely on, side of chips and steamed veggies. Don't shop when you're hungry. So if you're struggling with your meat cravings, they're going to be amplified if you go to the supermarket or a food hall when you're starving. You're also more likely to overpurchase and end up with more food waste at the end of the week, which isn't great for the environment. And lastly, be adventurous with new flavors and cuisines. This shouldn't be a month of deprivation, but one of eating it in abundance and experimenting with new dishes and new flavors. Have some fun with it. You might have a few misses in there, but you're going to have a lot of hits as well. And just to close, I'd like to say a really big thank you for tuning in. If you want more info on that plant-based high five I've run you through, you can download that as an ebook with some expanded information, and that's for free on the Lentil Intervention website. And just a really quick plug for the Lentil Intervention. So this is something I co-founded with Ben Eidelberg in New Zealand. So we're Australia, New Zealand based. We've got a whole bunch of resources on our website, as well as a podcast where we focus on plant-based nutrition and environmental concerns and lifestyle medicine. So check that out if you're interested in learning more. But basically, that's it from me. Big thank you for taking part. You're a bunch of legends.
Thank you so much, Emma. And we do have a few questions. So if you're happy to answer a few that have come around. The firstly, I'd encourage everyone to listen to the Lentil Intervention. It is a brilliant podcast and really looks at the environmental crisis. It's not that we're facing, but looks at it through evidence and there's a real positive solution-based discussions around what we can do and how we can engage with it and not feel the anxiety or the overwhelmed by it. So I think really encourage you guys to look at that one. The other so some of the questions we got, Laura's been brilliantly monitoring them for us. Question come about coconut and coconut oil. Now I know coconut oil is a saturated fat. It depends on who you're talking to and what you look like. Some people throw coconut in everything, and others are like avoid it like the plague. I know you did talk about oils there and how it impacts on our absorption of omegas in particular. But what are your thoughts around coconut oils and sometimes foods or?
Yes, sometimes foods, basically, long story short. So if you're needing to use it in a dessert, for example, that you're making this month, you can go for it, but I definitely wouldn't be consuming it daily. I wouldn't be downing it with some people put it in their coffee, some people have it on a spoon. Please don't do that. It is predominantly saturated fat. The argument here is that some people say, but it's mainly medium triglycerides, which are metabolized differently. That's only a certain percentage of it. The rest is still your standard saturated fats. So from a long-term health perspective, cardiovascular disease risk perspective, this is one that I would be minimizing in the diet if you can.
Yep. So if you're doing a curry with coconut milk, which is a lot of the beautiful recipes out there, you go for a low-fat one, for instance, would be a good option as well.
Yeah. So find the lowest fat one you can, and then make sure that you're loading up with plenty of fiber in that. So if you're adding a whole bunch of fresh veggies and you're serving it with like a whole grain brown rice, for example, that's going to help kind of dull the effects a little bit. But I wouldn't be, getting white bread and deep frying it in coconut, for example. Like the more you have these types of fats that you maybe want to just be mindful of, include it with massive amounts of fiber, because that's going to be more beneficial for you. Excellent.
And one of the questions that comes up every year, normally around day 4, is around non-gassy food, non-gassy veggies. The one thing I've heard from Dr. Kate Marsh, who we've worked with on our website, and the brilliant advice Kate gave us, but is to start small with your legumes and lentils and to build up, because absolutely, when you're introducing these new proteins and plants into your body, they can create some new and interesting activity. But what's your advice there, and any to avoid or any to
So theoretically, the smaller the lentil or legume is, the easier it should be to digest. So there's a few tips here. Number one is absolutely start low and start slow. So if you find that you've been a bit gassy and quite sensitive to large amounts of legumes, cut back to about 1 to 2 tablespoons. Don't just keep it at that though. You want to add maybe some tofu in there as well to make sure that you're getting enough protein still. But with your fibrous legumes, start with about a tablespoon or 2, and then slowly work up over the course of a few weeks as your body kind of adjusts to that. You might also want to look at how you're cooking them. So you want them to be very, very soft, easily squishable, on the roof of your mouth, and soaking them beforehand will also help as well. But yeah, the smaller ones theoretically should be slightly easier to digest for you. And then certain people will have a bit of a sensitivity to something called FODMAPs, which are carbohydrates that ferment in your gut. So you might need to kind of look at your FODMAP load of the particular meal that you're having. To do that though, I'd get a bit of input from a dietitian about specifics there.
Yeah. And then I think the next question might be the similar advice in terms of, and I've always say this, go and talk to an accredited practicing dietitian. My sister is one, and she's brilliant, and the knowledge that you guys have is awesome. But people with celiac disease and or gluten intolerances, etc. Any tips there for doing no meat May? Or
I would just say as unprocessed as possible, basically, because a lot of the like the fake meat products and whatnot will contain a bit of gluten. So you need to be really, really careful about reading the labels and just be certain of what you're getting if you are going for the more processed stuff. But if you're basing your meals around your gluten-free whole grains, your legumes, your tofu, and then a whole bunch of veggies, it's safe to do, and it can be easy to do. It's just you can't really fall back as easily as other people can on the more processed stuff.
Yeah. And the one big powerhouse that I love, and talked about it before, is oats, and such a great nutritional source of nutrition for anybody, but particularly if you're a plant-based eater. But having those oats in the morning, and but if you have celiac disease, you can get gluten-free oats, or it's tricky. You
can get wheat-free oats. So in Australia, oats crops are often contaminated with wheat because they're often grown and processed in a similar way. Some people with celiac still won't be able to have those oats, even if they are like certified wheat-free, because there's a particular protein called adenine in oats, and it's quite similar chemically, structure-wise, to gluten. And some people can be a little bit sensitive to that, whereas other people who have celiac disease are perfectly fine with having it. So it's something you kind of want to work under your health professional with to work out whether you can actually tolerate those or not. If you can't have those though, and you're missing a big bowl of warm kind of grains in the morning, you could go for some quinoa flakes or some buckwheat, for example. That would be a really good substitute.
Yep, excellent. Question here around almond milk and all the additives that are in almond milk. If you can't afford to get the organic products, and you're buying those, they're all tested by food standards, etc.
Yep.
They're all safe.
Yep. I mean, if they weren't safe, they wouldn't be on your supermarket shelf, long story short, because they do have to get past. There's a food safety regulatory body that looks at all these types of additives and assesses whether they're safe or not for human consumption and the amounts that you would be having in those products. If you want to get into the weeds of things, some people, especially if you've got, inflammatory bowel disease, for example, you may need to be a little bit more cautious with some of the emulsifiers and whatnot. But by and large, for the general population, almond milk off the shelf is going to be fine.
Yeah, awesome. Now, the question here, is there a difference between sprouted wheat germs versus non-sprouted?
The sprouted will have just gone through like that sprouting process, basically. So if you're really mindful of not having like a high dose of phytates, for example, that's going to have reduced the phytates a little bit. It potentially could make the vitamins and minerals a little bit more bioavailable to you as well. That's the main difference. But if it's a huge price difference, for example, and you're trying to work out which one to go for and your budget's a bit tight, I just go for the normal one. It's good to have either way.
Yep. I think there might be some more questions that pop in over the next 24 hours, actually, because this live, there's a lot of people in different time zones who'll be watching this in an hour or 2 hours time. So if your question is, I'll pop your questions in the comments, I should say. Even if you're not watching this live, drop your comments in. Emma's very kindly offered to jump in there and answer your questions that come in the next 24 hours. And so drop them in there. We'll keep an eye on them as well and drop in some information. But yeah, I just wanted to thank Emma again so much for your time. Your knowledge is incredible. I'm like I'm a black belt vegan. I'm probably approaching 10 years. But every time I talk to you, I learn something new about nutrition and something that I can take away and take into my daily life. So incredibly grateful for your time and your knowledge, and encourage everyone to listen to the Lentil Intervention. As I said, it's a really great source of knowledge and some really great positive conversations around what we can do with regards to environment and particularly eating well. So thanks for everyone for joining us, and thank you to Emma.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic month and talk to you again soon.
And we'll see you actually in 2 weeks' time, I should say, as well. We're going to do the unpacking of some of the myths around plant-based eating. So Emma's preparing a new presentation and looking at some of those common things that come up that maybe put people off plant-based eating. So I encourage you all to come back on the 17th and listen to that one. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emma.
Bye.